Hi, I'm Michelle Olivier, and you're listening to Hey, I Want Your Job, the podcast that looks at amazing jobs and what it takes to get them. Hi, and welcome to Hey, I Want Your Job. But today, that's a lie. I really don't want your job, but I am so glad that you do it, Karise. So that probably is not a great intro, but it is an honest one, which is kind of how I roll. So before people start to wonder, can you please answer, what is your job title?
I'm a social worker, but I actually work in two spaces. So in one very large part of my work is in child protection investigations. And then the other aspect, I have a private practice where I support adolescents.
Okay. So what does that mean that you actually do? Day ending and why?
So as a child protection investigator, I take reports in relation to the welfare of children. And I do what it takes in terms of trying to ascertain the facts around what may have occurred, and look at what referrals might need to be made, for example, to police or particular statutory child welfare agencies. I've worked in a number of different spaces in that role. So in one particular role that I was in a few years ago, for 3 years, I basically sat on the internet all day on the dark web, investigating child sexual abuse on the internet. So that was quite intense. And I think that's probably what you're getting at when you say you wouldn't like to do my job.
That is correct.
Yeah, so that was quite a large aspect of that particular role. And then in my private practice, I work with young people that may have sort of mental health concerns or might need some sort of counselling or capacity building. And I particularly focus on young people with problematic online behaviours.
Okay. So how do you get to be in that role? Like, at what point as a young girl did you think to yourself, Mommy, when I grow up, I want to lock up pedophiles? Like, when did this happen? How did this come to be?
I became interested in social work and helping people in the community in my early 20s.
Right.
And it was basically, I guess, a particular role that I saw advertised, which was that investigator role. Mm-hmm. I'd already been studying social work for a while, but I always knew that I wanted to work with young people, and I was really passionate about keeping young people safe. And so I saw the investigator role advertised, and I've always been someone who I think does things a little bit different from the norm. So when I saw the ad, I was like, oh, this might be interesting. And when I went for the interview and learnt, more about the job, I was absolutely hooked. And from there on in, that sort of was nine years ago. No, six years ago since I started there, 9 years in child welfare. And yeah, like once I did that job, it's like when you see these things happen to children that are just the worst of the worst that you could possibly imagine humans to do to other humans, how can you not do more? How can you not dedicate your entire life to it? For me, it's something that is in my blood now. It's just part of who I am, and it's what I will always do till the day I die. I will always work towards keeping kids safe, and I will always do something that is in this space around positive education for young people and families about how to prevent these kinds of things from happening. So, yeah, I can't do anything else.
Like I said, I am so very grateful for people like you out there that are able to do this kind of thing. And I know myself well enough to know that I would not be on that list. So that brings me to one of the questions that I have, is that one of the stereotypes about people who work in your line of work is that most of the people who go into this field do so because something bad happened to them in their childhood. Is that your experience? Is that people are looking to protect, either like they watch something happen to a friend or a brother or a cousin or to themselves or something like that? Is that stereotype real, or is that just one of those things that Hollywood tells us is why people do it?
I don't think necessarily.
Okay.
But again, you know, a lot of people that I've met, you know, through the work, it's not something you would talk about. What may or may not happen to you as a
on
child.
Criminal Minds. I'm just saying, Karise. Like, they all share their trauma a lot. Those are very moving episodes. So
you're sometimes, you know, in certain situations, colleagues may share that they've had their own share of trauma, but I think most people have had their own share of trauma.
sure.
So, you know, we all come from that trauma-informed perspective, and we've all got our life experiences that we use, you know, to inform what we do. But yeah, I don't think so. I mean, a very large proportion, huge proportion of the people that I've met in this work do it because they're just really passionate about keeping kids safe. They're just really, really passionate about, you know, making sure that someone out there is fighting for the safety of kids. So yeah, I think that is probably one of the bigger drivers.
Sure. Okay. So that actually makes me feel a little bit better, because when you see the Hollywoodized version and people are like, kid, I understand. I was you. What do you know what I mean? I'm just like, oh my God, this feels like you're making your problem their problem now. Like, I'm not sure that this is really helping. This feels like terrible, like clinical approach to helping people in crisis. So that makes me feel a little bit better that people are there from purely altruistic and not just like responsive to their own personal background. So what you do is insanely hard. How do you do what you do and then have a normal life and go have dinner with your husband and smile and laugh and everything is normal? What do you do to maintain that?
Self-care, self-care, self-care.
Okay.
I think you have to you can't pretend that it's not happening, and you can't just be, you know, oh, everything's fine. So sure. I think the best way that I could probably explain it is in terms of, so with my young people that I work with in my practice, I use a form of therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT for short. And ACT is very much about, you're not focusing on thinking positive. You're not focusing on, oh, let's all be happy all the time and everything's fine. And so we look at how we can take action towards the things that we value and that are really meaningful to us, regardless of any challenges or struggles or difficulties that might come up. So in this particular work, for example, you know, if I want to be an effective practitioner for my clients, then I have to model what it is that I'm teaching. Sure. So, you know, I allow those difficulties to be there. You know, I accept that there's these really horrible things that happen to people in this world, but I focus on why I'm there. I focus on what it is that's really important to me and what I find meaningful about the work, and why I do what I do and the good that I can do. Otherwise, I wouldn't be effective. I wouldn't be able to do my job. And that's one less person doing that job.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because I am not alone in feeling that I would not want your job. So that it is very much one of those types of roles. So my best friend's mom has worked for Child Protective Services for over 20 years, doing investigations. And then literally at about the 20-year mark, she went, I'm done. I just can't anymore. And so she went from that. She stayed within Child Protective Services because, again, same as you, she was like, once you've seen the worst, you can't leave these kids. And she moved into adoptions, thinking that would be easier. And apparently adoptions is just a different type of awful. I know that people who do this are just insanely passionate, and it takes such a toll. But I also know from firsthand watching it that so many people that she tells what she does either get terrified instantly that they are being judged, even when they are not, or they are like, oh my God, it makes me uneasy even to have you here because it's a reminder that those things exist, not just in the shadow. Is that something that you experience as a human being in this world? You're nodding, so that makes me think, yes, Karise, talk to me about your experience of that.
And I also think the other thing is that people think when they hear that you work in child protection, and just to be clear, I don't actually work for a form of CPS in my state where I live, but yeah, when they hear that you work in that child welfare space, they think that you're watching them to see if they're treating their kids right. They start to get really self-conscious, you know, and that's absolutely not how I approach things, and that's not that I know of with my colleagues and my other people in my networks. We're not, you know, automatically looking to see if our friends are doing anything wrong with their own children or whatever.
Oh,
you know,
Johnny didn't eat his green beans. Obviously, mom is neglectful.
Judgy. No. I just find people are generally either really fascinated, particularly when they hear about my time spent investigating online abuse. People tend to be quite fascinated. But then, you know, you have to be really careful about how much you tell them, obviously, because, you know, you can't disclose these, you know, identifying details and things like that. But also, they're just really curious. But I think you do, after a while of doing that kind of work, I don't want to say become immune to it, because you absolutely don't. You do not become immune to it at all. But you see a lot of particular things. So
and you would have to build coping strategies. Like you would have to have a plan, whereas the rest of us do not have a plan for dealing with those things because it is not in our daily life. So So I'm careful. I'm very careful. So I'm going to go now into the place that I am a little bit dreading, and I'm going to start asking some questions about your work. So I am a mom. I, like the rest of the world, I'm on the Facebook. My kids are stinking adorable, and they are all over the Facebook. I have friends who tell me that I'm crazy town for doing that I am opening up for danger, blah, blah, blah. My husband and I response is, in this day and age, if somebody wants that information, they can probably really get it. And that we have our accounts locked down as much as like only our friends can see it, et cetera, et cetera. You're the expert. Talk to me. What is your thought about pictures of cute ass kids on Facebook? It's okay to say I'm wrong. So that's okay.
It's really important for parents to be really, really careful. I think that, you know, one of the things that really does concern me that I do see on social media a lot is just the photos that parents share of children with identifying information. So it might be a school uniform with a logo. It may be at a particular sports field and they're talking about their little athletics that they may be playing, or a particular sports team that they might be playing in. You know, so in terms of this question, there's really two aspects to it. Okay. Number one is safeguarding your children. So being really mindful about what you share, information that you share about your child, because yes, it is happening. Yes, offenders are online and they do actively target children. Yes, it absolutely happens, and it can happen to anyone. So you know, from the safeguarding perspective, it's really important. Not sharing images of your children in the bath, not sharing images of your children in swimming costumes. A lot of that stuff is quite, that's pretty obvious. But being really mindful about your child's digital footprint. So when your child is a child, they don't have control over what images you're sharing of them or what information you're sharing about them. Mm-hmm. As they get older and they start to make their own decisions, they may decide that they do not want to reveal as much on social media as others, or they might. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, when they're younger, you're making that decision for them. So it's being really mindful of that.
So at what age would you recommend parents start to have that dialogue with their kids? At what age would you say, because we hear don't put kids on, gives kids screen time. Like my children have no idea what Facebook is. Like that's not a thing, but I know they have peers who know exactly what Facebook is. And like, you know, I have opinions about, and that's at 2 and 4. So, what age do you think that it's healthy for parents to start having a dialogue about the social media and the internet in general and photos being there and what that looks like?
So that's the second part.
Okay.
So the first part is the safeguarding. The second part is absolutely building capacity in your child. And there really is no child's too young to start. So now I get nothing for this, and she would have no idea. I do not know her, but there is an absolutely incredible book that I think is just brilliant. It's called Raising Humans in a Digital World.
Okay.
It's written by Diana Graeber.
Okay.
And she's quite popular in the US. She does workshops in schools all around the US. But this book for parents is absolutely brilliant. And what it does is it goes through age-appropriate conversations that you can have with young people, with children and young people. And it also goes through activities that you can do at home with them to start getting them used to things. And, she advocates getting your child started on capacity building at a really young age. And that comes down to the way that you actually use your phone around them, and the way that you get them to use the phone, say, to talk to grandparents. So you get them used to using things like Skype and Zoom and those sorts of things, but you do it in a way where you're teaching them how to do it in a safe way right from the beginning. So right from a really, really young age. So if anyone's looking for a really good resource,
that's great. I'll put that in the show notes
fantastic
for people as well. That's great. So
yeah.
That's really helpful. So I guess ultimately, would you say that best case scenario is don't put pictures of your kids on Facebook, like just full stop? Or would you say that in today's society, it's going to happen, just don't be an idiot about it?
I think that I'm going to be quite diplomatic. Parents need to decide for them. Parents need to decide for themselves what's best for their families.
Okay.
But if you are going to do that, just be really discerning, be really discriminating about the information that you're going to put on there, and just really think about the consequences of what might happen with that information. There are things like targeting of children, finding out where they live. So there's that aspect, but then there's also the other aspect, which is images are constantly taken and photoshopped and used for things that you do not want to know about. Yeah. So it's really important that you consider both sides or both types of consequences.
So that kind of brings me to one of the kind of ongoing debates that is in sort of this space in social media, in the media in general right now, is I guess what I think of as the backlash to helicopter parenting, which is to say that the world is much safer than it was when I was a child, back in the 80s, and that we don't give that much airtime because now communication systems are so much better that we hear about every little thing. Whereas previously, there was actually a much higher incidence of all of this kind of stuff and just nobody knew, and it was truly in the shadows. And then you have other people saying, that's absolutely ridiculous. The level of access has gone up so high that it is much easier for people to do these types of things now. What, as an expert, like where do you fall on that? Is it fewer instances and the world is safer and kind, what is it, curving towards kindness? Or is it that the incredible access has made it worse?
Research shows that, research absolutely shows that the numbers are increasing. The ability, as technology increases, the ability for, predators, offenders towards children have greater access. And, our industry is always working to keep up with that or go beyond that. So, yeah, the stats show that it's on the increase, particularly with COVID now as well.
So talk to me about that. Why is COVID making it worse? What's going on?
Well, you've got, a lot of people working from home. So, in that space, they don't necessarily have the surveillance around them that they would have if they were, say, in the office. So they're online all the time. The opportunity is greater for them to be able to, you know, access the sites that, you know, the problematic sites. You've got, if you're working, if you're living in a country where, you know, young people are not at school and doing homeschooling, then the young people are online a lot more often as well. So there's just greater opportunity for that online connection. Some people have got more time on their hands. So the temptation is greater in terms of, I'm talking about in terms of offenders. And then, you know, you've also got just that sort of mental health aspect of the pandemic, which has affected a lot of people in a really big way from a mental health perspective. And one of the things that we used to see a lot in my previous role doing the online investigations is that some people are more prone to offending when their mental health isn't great. They have less capacity for self-control.
That makes sense.
Yeah, or they may be, you know, using substances more often because of that, which then, you know, sort of lowers their inhibitions and their boundaries. And so they maybe have a greater propensity for offending then. So there's a number of factors in terms of COVID, but research is absolutely, the stats are definitely showing that it's been on the increase, which is quite scary.
That is terrifying and upsetting, but I'm really happy to have an actual answer to that as well. So thank you for clarifying, as much as I didn't like the answer that I got. And so then I guess going with that, one of the things that we hear, or that I have heard over and over and over again in training for all kinds of, you know, crisis management and blah, 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 is that you are most likely to be abused by somebody that you know or a family member. And that is still the case for children. Is that still true, or is the level of like internet predators and all that starting to change that and making it more, because you have more access to strangers now than you used to?
To be honest, I don't know the answer to that question. I haven't looked at the latest research in that particular space. I still think that it's still something that I think that now where it's at is parents need to be mindful of both aspects. Absolutely, there is still great opportunity in terms of contact abuse, which is contact abuse we're looking at, you know, in person, in reality, in person, you know, person to person, that physical, you know, people with each other. But then you've got the online abuse, which is different, but there's a huge risk for that too. So in a way, it's two completely different things, even though it is still, both of them are still sexual abuse. They both still have the same impacts. They have the same, you know, they both still have incredible trauma to young people, cause incredible trauma to young people. They're still, both of them are still, neither is, you know, better or worse than the other. They're two completely different things in terms of what you need to be looking out for and building capacity in young people. The online space is, you know, we've all, I guess when we were growing up, we all knew about stranger danger and things like that, you know, and we looked out for that sort of thing. And, you know, parents would educate young people or children and young people about, you know, their bodies and consent and those sorts of things. But then putting all of that capacity building in place in the online context is a whole nother thing. And it can be not so overt. It can happen really in really small, slow ways.
It's a space that, you know, generationally, we are not as comfortable in, right? Like walking down the street, we're very comfortable with walking down the street. We get that. But the ticky-talkie, I am no good at the ticky-talking. Like I've tried to TikTok, Karise, and me and TikTok do not see eye to eye in any way. And don't even get me started on Clubhouse. So like, I am totally worried that, you know, I'm already old. My kids are super young. And that by the time they get to be of the age where they have their own devices, they have their own access to those kind of places, that I'm going to just genuinely not understand the space well enough to be a good guide there. So I think that probably, as a parent, like that for me, I know is one of the things that makes it more frightening and even worse. And I'm fairly tech savvy.
So what I think is, and a lot of parents feel this way, a lot of youth workers feel this way. And I think what's really important to remember is that skilling your child, building capacity in your child to keep themselves safe online, you can do that through your relationship with them. So once you teach them skills to keep themselves safe online, those skills are transferable to whatever game or platform or app they're using. So it's all about building the foundational skills. It's not about you knowing every single aspect of the latest apps. While it's great, and it is because you can teach them about privacy settings and things like that, and you know about, particular risks with those, platforms or whatever they might be. I guess I want to really stress to parents that don't get caught up in that part.
Okay.
Don't get so caught up in that part that it actually, hinders you from doing the capacity building with your child. If you do that work around, respectful relationships, thinking critically about what they're looking at and who they're talking to, all of those kinds of things, then that will be transferable to whatever it is that they're using. And it's also transferable in their offline world.
Sure.
So it's about teaching them those skills that they can use and keep themselves safe and be kind to others and have empathy and things like that. Because we're also looking at the cyberbullying as well, not necessarily just about people hurting them, but them hurting others as well. So if you work on those skills and the relationship and teaching them those real fundamental foundational skills about being a responsible digital citizen, then it transfers to whatever it is that they're using.
And that's kind of, as a parent, that's what we've been trying to work with. That's the advice that similar to what we have been given for advice. And like right now we make it a game because they're tiny, small humans. And so we're, they come over and they're like, tickle me. And so we'll tickle them and they're like, but they have a safe word. And my oldest will absolutely walk up to you and say, Karise, I want you to tickle me, but my safe word is bees. And when I say my safe word, that means you have to stop. And he thinks it's the best game in the world. So he like flings himself and says, tickle me. And then we tickle. And then he goes, bees. And then like, that's all part of the game, which right now is really funny. But then obviously that builds into other dialogues, etc. My friends all think it's hilarious that my children have a safe word that they literally refer to as a safe word. But I think that it's important in terms of a consent builder. So that makes me as a mom feel better that I'm like on the right path. And so I feel like I already have like I have a book for resource and I have validation that I'm doing something right, which makes me very happy. This is already a great podcast, Karise. Thank you. So we talked a lot about the media already and like all of the things that people think they know about what you do and what's going on. What would you say does the media do that you just every time you're like, damn it, that just makes your life and what you do that much harder?
I think that what they could do better is give more opportunities for young people to have a voice. Young people know what works for them. They know what they know what they need. They actually really do. And I think that the opportunities for young people to have a voice in the media are really limited. And I think that could really improve things in the media. And I also think that it's really important for people to know, and I don't think this often comes across, is that a very, very overwhelming majority of people who work in the child welfare space, in the myriad of areas, not just, investigations or child protection, we do it because we actually really love it and we're really passionate about it. And it is for those altruistic reasons. And unfortunately, we're not always portrayed that way. And I think that there's a lot of good happening in this space all around the world. And we need to really promote that so that parents know where to go to find resources. Because one of the things that I'm often told is by parents is, I had no idea where to find this. I searched forever and I couldn't find, someone who, say, for example, like me, specializes in, concerning online behaviors. So it's really important, I think, as part of anything in the media is, promoting the resources and the things that are available to parents and research that's available that can be really helpful. And yeah, I think we need to do more of that.
So I want to kind of segue into that part of the work that you do, the helping with the young people in concerning behaviors. As a parent, at what point is there a concerning behavior that I need to contact you? Like, what does that look like? Because my guess is that once it gets really bad, we know, but that if people had come to you 6 months, 12 months earlier, it would have been a lot easier to address the issue. So what are the red flags that parents need to look out for with their young people to know whether or not, to know when it may be a time to get some help?
So obviously spending a lot of time online, and potentially maybe being a little bit aggressive when you're trying to sort of take a device off them or, limit their usage. I would say just have that then sort of, I wouldn't say it's a red flag, but I'd be thinking, okay, what's going on? Why are they being so, hooked with being online? What's going on there? Because that could be for a number of reasons. It could just be because that's their only social outlet, and that's the only place they find that they can connect with friends. It may be that they don't have many friends at school, and these are people that are other peers that they meet online. It might also be because someone is grooming them. And that relationship is really important to them. And they may not even know that that's an adult. They may think it's another young person because of the way that, offenders do present themselves online to kids. It also might be an indication that they might be being cyberbullied, because often when young people are being cyberbullied, they actually want to keep getting back online to check what's being said about them. They want to know, what have they said now? So, being really secretive about what they're doing on the internet is another sort of indicator of something that might need to be looked at a little bit more closely. Being withdrawn. They're sort of the main ones that come to mind immediately, but there's a whole list of things to be mindful of. If they're being contacted by new people online, if they're meeting up with people that they've met online and they're quite sort of secretive about it. Absolutely, it's a big concern if young people are actually meeting up with people that they've met online, in offline space. And then obviously, a lot of the normal indicators where there might be something going on from a mental health perspective, whether that might be particular posts that they're looking at, particular posts that they're making themselves, whether there's some kind of a darker element to it, whether it might express, emotions in a way that might seem like something's bothering them. So I guess you're looking at from a content perspective, and then you're also looking at a behavioural perspective around the use of the internet. And then you're also looking at the types of people that they're connecting with online as well.
So all of that brings up something that's a pretty hot topic of debate amongst my peer group, which is finding the balance between respecting increasing privacy need in young people and keeping your kids safe. So I have some friends who the child knows that they have random spot checks on their social media. They don't tell you when. Parents walk in. They expect to have logins to everything at all times. Your devices are locked down. Like that is their norm. And the parents have said, like, under my house, under my rules kind of deal. And I have other folks who say, I need to trust my kid and give them space so that they can look at porn if they need to without, at 14, without mom being up in their business. And that's their choices, and that they try to watch for these other signals and stuff, but that they otherwise completely leave that space to their kid. My guess is that somewhere in between is probably the right answer. But what is your recommendation on that? Because I completely feel that no teenager wants mom all up in their business. But at the same time, every mom is terrified of what is happening and feels like we want to control. So, what is the best way to handle that balance as a parent?
I think that the first scenario that you described is pretty close to what I will often talk to parents about.
Okay.
But that said, you've got to look at each young person based on their age and their capacity. Okay. So there is no blanket rule. And I know that that's not the answer that you're looking for, but there really is no blanket rule, because each young person is different and each family is different. But, some of the strategies that you talked about in the beginning, absolutely. So, having such a relationship with your child, with your young person, where, it's known that you will check, no computers in the bedrooms or no devices in the bedrooms, particularly, especially late at night. So, they may have their phone, depends on the age, obviously, and capacity, as I've said, but they might have their phone in their room at, like, say, 3 or 4 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, and they're talking to their friends or whatever, and what's going on. But absolutely in the evenings, in the late evenings when everyone should be asleep, no devices in the rooms at that time. Some people find it really effective that they have the home computer is, out in a more common area, so like a lounge room or a dining room or somewhere like that. But any strategies that you put in place at home, they're going to be more effective if you're doing that in collaboration with the young person. If you're just dictating and telling them you can't do this and you can't do that and you're not allowed to do this, they're going to find other ways to access that content that they want to see.
Sure. So building the buy-in from your young person and the understanding is really, it sounds like the key. So
absolutely.
I mean, so you work with young people in this space. Is that possible for a 16-year-old to be zen with his mom being in his Twitter account or his Insta? I mean, is that, because I know as a 16-year-old, it would not have been a possibility with my relationship with my parents for them to come anywhere near something that I had declared a private space without me completely losing my shit in their general direction. So but there are ways that you can manage that relationship so that the young person is okay with that.
Absolutely. I see it all the time. And it's about, as I said 1,000 times, it is about relationship. It is about relationship. And it's really hard. I know it can get really hard with young people who are finding their identity and doing a bit of risk taking and, testing the boundaries. That's a healthy, normal part of being a teenager. But if you are doing it in a way where they understand why you're doing it, and that's because you love and care for them and you're keeping them safe, but you're doing it together, and you start, where possible, start at a younger age, where you already established that relationship around, well, this is just how we do things. We're very open with each other about technology and our use of technology, right from a younger age. Then by the time they hit that teenage age, it's not this random weird thing. They've lived with it all their life. And you'll find that if you do pick up that Diana Graeber book, you'll find that she talks a lot about that, developing that relationship at a younger age. And I also think that, we as adults, interacting with young people, we need to model that behavior ourselves. It's no good for us to be standing there saying, you can't do this and you can't look at that and I'm going to check this, when you're not being transparent about your own usage. Young people will notice if you're there on your phone all the time and you're on Facebook 75% of the day. Absolutely, teenagers will notice that. And so if you're saying to them, get off your phone, you're always on your phone, yet you're there always on your phone, how can you expect them to respect what it is that you're trying to build with them if you're actually doing it yourself? So it's about role modeling those behaviors as well.
That makes sense. So, you got to walk the talk. Otherwise, you're just, being a jerk. So
teenagers are very clever and they're very perceptive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I kind of touched earlier on something and then we kind of moved on, but I want to double back and be explicit in the conversation about porn. A lot of the folks in my sphere and world feel like pornography is like one of those normal rites of passage for teenagers, that they are going to watch porn and you can either choose to freak out about it or you can choose to say, hey, just so you know, that is not reality and you should probably make some safe choices around it, but whatever. And that giving them some bandwidth there is healthy. What is your thought on that? And if you think that ever is appropriate, at what point would that be appropriate and when would it stop being?
The first thing I want to say is that pornography today is very different to pornography when, say, you and I were teenagers.
Okay.
Pornography on the internet is very, very different.
Okay.
And research shows, there's a higher prevalence of pornography that's more aggressive, that's more violent. It's much easier to access more extreme content now than it was, say, 20 years ago. So we're looking at a completely different animal. We're looking at a completely different thing. So I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's accurate when people compare, oh, well, look at when we were kids and look at what we looked at and what we
all looked at Playboy when we were kids. Absolutely. Yeah.
That is not pornography in today's society. And, my greatest concern, or one of my really big concerns when I work with young people, is that is where they're getting their sex education. A lot of young people are getting their sex education from pornography online, which is absolutely not ideal at all. And
I think not ideal, maybe the understatement of this discussion.
Absolutely.
So far.
It's just, it's not a good place at all for young people to be getting any kind of sex education. And, there's a number of reasons as to why they do that. Curiosity, embarrassment, their friends might be looking at it. There may be some peer pressure there. They may be really nervous about, having sex for the first time and not want to talk to anyone about it and find out what it's all really like. But unfortunately, a lot of young people are turning to the internet and pornography on the internet, and looking at pornography, thinking this is how normal sex is. And this is what women like, and this is how women respond. And then the hard bit then is that the females, like young female teenagers, think that that's how they have to respond, and they have to be willing to do some of those things. And
that
so
has been true since we were young. Like,
yeah, and it's a misconception on both sides.
Absolutely.
So it's very worrying. Yeah, it is very worrying.
I remember as a young woman being very embarrassed that my boobs did not stay exactly pointing up when I was on my back, like they did in like the movies and pictures, like, gravity affected my breasts. And I didn't have sufficient like worldliness to understand that that's because mine are not full of silicone. So that part, at least, that is nothing new. The other things I understand, like, that makes the increased, graphic nature, the increased violence, and the fact that there's just so much access to extreme everything. There's a kink for everybody, and all of it is available on the internet. So, Yeah, absolutely. So that was really interesting and so helpful. But I want to zig a little bit and talk about like the practicality of your job as a job. So first thing I ask all of my guests is, how do you respond when somebody asks you how much you make?
It's an interesting question. People generally don't ask me how much I make, which is yeah, and because I think maybe they're just so fascinated with what I do. You definitely don't get into this work to be rich.
Yeah.
But that said, where I work at the moment, I'm actually really well taken care of financially. So I'm very happy. I'm very, very, very happy with what I earn. But I think in this work, there's all different kinds of jobs in, child welfare and child protection where there's a huge variance in salaries.
Mm-hmm.
But when you have skills as an investigator, so when you actually reach that level of being an investigator, you can earn quite good money. But it's the same as if you're an investigator in other industries as well. So yeah, and that is sort of from the investigation perspective, you're doing that extra training and the extra education and that sort of thing, which brings you up that bit higher.
So what does that look like? And I understand that you're in Australia and I'm here in the States. And so there's probably some differences between those systems. But in general, what types of skills do you need to acquire to take it to that next level? What types of additional coursework are you taking beyond what you would find in a normal social working master's degree or coursework?
Yeah, so I am currently, I haven't quite finished it yet, but I'm doing a certificate in government investigations.
Okay.
But a lot of those skills that I need, I've already learned on the job.
Okay.
So a Cert 4 in investigations is, fantastic. And there's a couple of amazing, places to do those in Australia where the training is like really comprehensive and it prepares you really, really well to do the job. But you've got to have the subject matter knowledge in the particular area that you want to investigate as well. So you've got the two parts. Yeah, so as an investigator, you tend to earn, I believe you tend to earn just that bit better money. Okay. And it also depends on whether you work from a government agency, so public or private. Yeah. And then, from private practice, obviously, with my private practice, although, I obviously, charge a fee, again, I'm not in that to be rich. I love the work. Although I like to say I do the work for the love of it, we also still need to get paid for what we do for our time. But I also actually do academic tutoring. So I tutor social work students and I do that at a really reduced rate. And I pretty much almost do that for the love of it because I really enjoy helping support new social workers to come through and move into the industry. So, yeah.
So if somebody listens to this podcast and they're like, oh my God, I've always wanted to do this. This is amazing. What is like step 1, 2, 3? If you were just going to boil it really, really, really down to its simplest components, is step 1 a master's of social work?
No.
Okay.
So that's what's really, really amazing about what I do is that we're not all social workers. Okay. A really large proportion of the people that I work with are actually, or in this space of, child welfare or child protection investigations, come from policing backgrounds. So we have people from policing backgrounds, we have people from legal backgrounds, social workers, child protection caseworkers, other investigators from other industries. So yeah, you can actually come from a number of different spaces and still do this really incredible, amazing, interesting, really rewarding work. Yeah, and that's the beauty of it, I think, which is amazing. And the other thing I think that is an amazing sort of benefit of that is that we all, when we have cases, we all, consult with each other and we have all these amazing different perspectives on how to manage a case or how to what action to take or what the risks might be, because we look at it from different perspectives. And we bring that with us about, oh, well, you know, people from this particular industry or this agency might think this and these might think this. So we need to, when you look at a case, you need to make sure that you're really thorough in terms of how you're assessing the risk and how you're managing that risk. And so if you've got the wealth of knowledge from your colleagues who have worked in different industries, then it can only help you to do a better job. So it's great.
So if you are in something that is in no way adjacent to this, the first step is finding something at least adjacent before moving into it. Is that so? If you are today working as, I don't know, an HR executive, and you think, you know what, I am done with HR, I want to do something meaningful, let me go help the children of the world be safer. Your first step would be to retrain. Your first step would be to do what? What would you, or how would you suggest get from point A to point B?
You would probably want to do something around child welfare. So if you want to get into child protection investigations, you would need to have some kind of knowledge in child welfare. So, you know, you could do some sort of course in that space, whether that is, I mean, in Australia, you know, we've got things like TAFE courses that are Diploma of Community Services, youth work, those sorts of things. You could potentially do some work in the space around, you could do volunteering work in youth work.
Okay.
You could do some paid work around all the different areas of youth work, casework for non-government agencies. Just getting that experience up in the child welfare space is really important. And a lot of, you know, organisations in this space will really value unpaid work as well. So don't think, oh, well, I mean, one of the things that I struggled with when I was doing my degree, it was a couple of years of doing my degree before I actually got a job remotely in the space. And I, you know, became a little bit disheartened at first, but you've just kind of got to get creative about how you can get that experience. And if you want to get into child welfare work or child welfare investigations, you need to be in child welfare. Okay. So how do I get into that? You know, do I need to do a little bit of study to get me a sort of a lower level, entry level job, so I can get a bit of experience? Do I then need to also do some volunteer work? So I did volunteer work at a number of different places as well, just to build up my experience across different contexts. And then I gradually moved into more and more, you know, I guess a bit more intense kind of work, more complex work, more comprehensive work to get where I am now. And I also did with my degree, so I did a Bachelor of Social Work honours. Okay. And I actually did my honours thesis in the online vulnerabilities of young people in out-of-home care. So I specifically looked at this particular niche subject area for my honours thesis. So that actually then helped me to get other employment in that, because I developed that sort of expert knowledge in that particular area.
That is a fantastic answer. So thank you for that, because I have actually had 2 clients that did want to make, like, this area in particular, I think just draws people to it. So like I had one client who had worked in oil fields, and the oil industry in Texas is not doing so great, shall we say. And he was like that. He was like, you know what? I really want to go work for CPS and be a caseworker. I want to help kids. I was like, oh, well, Brent, that's a big zig. All right, let's figure that one out. And I had another client, similar kind of thing, like just something completely different, that then wanted to move that direction. So that was a super, super helpful answer. I appreciate that.
Oh, good. You'll often find when you want to work in a government agency, and obviously, you know, it's a bit different across countries, but I know in Australia, for example, in some of the states in Australia, if you want to work for one of those government agencies, there will be a particular educational criteria that you have to meet. There will be a particular course, and they will only take you if you've done that course. However, I also know that a lot of those agencies have sort of one time period a year where they'll take new graduates. And so, you know, at other times of the year, you might need that course and some casework experience. Whereas at particular times of the year, they'll take new graduates where they understand that you might not have a lot of the hands-on, but you've got the course, or you might be finishing the course. So finishing in the next couple of months, and they do that recruitment process as you're finishing. So you just got to keep your eye out and look for the advertisements for the job ads. Have a look at what it actually is that they're looking for, what course it is that you have to do, or even give the HR office a call and ask them, what are your minimum requirements in terms of study?
I think that the biggest thing for me, and I was really, really happy to hear you echo this, that I always tried to tell people who try to make that shift, is that this area does really value volunteer work. That absolutely, if you're applying for a job with corporate ABC Corp, no, they don't give a shit what you did for free. They don't value it. They think that, like, you're absolutely right. Like, they don't care. But in this space, they care so much, and it absolutely counts for all kinds of things. So that was great to hear that echoed by you. So thank you. So we are running out of time, but I would literally be remiss and not doing my job if I didn't ask you if you can give one just really great piece of advice for keeping your kids safe when they're little, when they're kids, and when they're teenagers. One thing that you wish that parents so 3 things in total, that you wish parents for those aged kids would know and take to heart. Hashtag no
so
pressure.
Hard when you say one. Oh, look, I've already said relationship.
So for the teenagers, it's build your relationship, or you can use a new one because you've already said that one. So
for children, it's definitely the relationship, because you're creating those building blocks ready for when they move into the teenage years. The teenagers, I think it's going to be so hard to give you one answer, but absolutely give them a voice. Okay. Absolutely give them a voice. And sorry, but part B
that's fine,
is meet them where they're at. Don't push them into things that they don't want to do. Meet them where they're at, meet them halfway, and they'll come along with you. So they're probably my biggest things. And be reliable. So follow through on what you say you'll do, because teenagers will pull you up on it. So always follow through on what you say you'll do, and they will get respect for you as well.
And what about for the littles? When they're still
the little ones, I think it's the role modeling, because they pick up on absolutely everything that you do. They're learning, their eyes are open, they're listening, they're soaking in absolutely everything. So it's very much about the role modeling of the behaviors that you want them to pick up on. Yeah.
All right. We are almost out of time. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you want to make sure that we do? I mean, there's 1,000 things I could ask you, but then this podcast would go on forever. So is there anything else you want to make sure to say before we say goodbye?
I just want to say that especially children, but especially teenagers, are absolutely incredible young people. And it's really important that we always, we give them a voice, we allow them to feel heard, we create a safe space for them to build relationships with us and to talk about the things that are bothering them and the things that they're really amazing at. So it's really important that we celebrate those things. And one of the things that I see a lot of is just that stifling, and, people making decisions for them. And I just think it's so important that when we work with teenagers, or when we do anything with teenagers, that it's done really collaboratively and in this real open space where they're allowed to participate. And it's something that I'm just so passionate about. Yep.
I love that as a final thought. So that makes me That makes me really happy. I think that's a really positive and inspiring thing to go out on. So thank you so much for coming and talking to me and telling me how wrong I am, but also validating a couple of things that I did right. So that was nice to hear as well. And also for being such a great role model and roadmap for how people can get into doing this really, really important work. So thank you, thank you, thank you 1,000 times over. Thanks, everybody. Bye. You've been listening to Hey, I Want Your Job. For more information on how you can get your own awesome job, visit ONH Consulting at www.onhconsulting.com. We offer incredible resumes, no-nonsense career advice, and real-world tips for landing a job in today's market. Check us out on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Insta for more insider information. Soon, you'll be hearing us say, I'm Michelle Olivier, and hey, I want your job.